Okay, welcome to Monmouth Battlefield. I'm Dr. David Martin, the president of the Friends Group. And we are volunteers who support the park through a number of ways. Actually, the door can stay open when people come in. Thank you for offering them. We give tours the first Sunday every month at 1:30. Sometimes they'll walk from here. Sometimes we'll drive to different parts of the battlefield. Our website, friendsofmonmouth.org, and also the newsletter, which is on the website, or you can pick one up after the talk today. We'll let you know where on the battlefield they're going. We also give these second Sunday lectures. I used to speak on weekday nights over at the main branch of the Monmouth County Library at Sims Drive, but COVID kind of slowed that all down, and afterwards they never got back in touch with me. So I said, what the heck? I'll recycle the talks here. I've got new ones coming in, and we have monthly. The talks are at 2 here in the auditorium, and that schedule is also in our newsletter. Our biggest event is to co-sponsor with the state the annual reenactment, which is next weekend, 20th and 21st. We'll have around 200 reenactors each day on each side, several cannons. The schedule is on the website, also in the newsletter. And I think at the reenactments, I don't know, I keep getting mixed up, we're changing times. Maybe around 2:30 Saturday and 1:30 Sunday. But there will be, the camps will be open, there'll be suppers here with period merchandise, food trucks. It's a full show. I just had somebody call me from New York State coming down. We plan to spend at least 4 hours. Get here, by 11 o'clock so you get a good parking spot. Weather is supposed to be good next weekend. We run about 6,000 visitors a day. The monthly talks are put on YouTube. I say the more popular ones are Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, and I forget what the next one is, but they're there on YouTube. And I'm doing lectures, especially around the county, as the special events, and those will be posted, especially on the Monmouth County Library website. Keep track of them myself. So what we'll be talking about today is they were also there. Now this is morphed out of a talk I did a few years ago, and I expanded it out that most everybody who was somebody in the Revolution was here at the time of the battle, except for Benedict Arnold. Not because he was traitorous already. He had been badly wounded up at the Battle of Saratoga the year before Monmouth, and he was left in charge of the town of Philadelphia when the rest of the army left for the campaign that ended up at the battle here. Unfortunately, in 2 accounts, when he was in Philadelphia, he started scamming or underselling the provisions market, making money on the side, and he fell in love with the widow of a British officer, those 2 items, because he was about to be arrested for scamming, and the British officer, he ends up trading sides, and you know the story, he died in disgrace in England. So he was not here, maybe just as well, even though he was a good fighter, but everybody else who's important, it will be here. Now the handout you have is very cleverly designed, because I have the famous people listed here, 1 to 15. Their pictures are mostly here on the back and on the front. I talked in January, I usually talk in January every year on Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, but you can see where they were at different times of the battle by looking at the chart there. Number 2 is left center, is where Aaron Burr was wounded around 12:30 at the time of the battle. And number 3, which is almost at the center, a little bit lower than right, is where Hamilton was wounded about the same, his horse was wounded about the same time Burr was. And those who heard the talk, they're both lieutenant colonels. Burr is of a field unit, and Hamilton is on Washington's staff. They both have their horses shot. The problem with Burr was the horse fell on him. I would not want to fall off a horse, period, let alone fall off a horse when it got wounded. And they will both be hurt or incapacitated. But that's another talk. And I talked last month on Lafayette and Wayne, the two most famous of Washington's lieutenants that were here. Wayne is cool. He's not Mad Anthony yet. He got mad in 1794 when he was fighting the Native Americans up in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. But he's the only major important officer that was on the field for all three parts of the battle. The battle will be fought in stages. I used to say like a chess game, but some people are more like a checkers game. I move, you move, I move, jump, 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 king me, you lose. The reason for this is the weapons, the muskets only shoot about 50 yards. So you can literally see where the enemy is all the time. That's why the British wear red coats. They want you to know where they are. And what the British will do is basically line up, lower their firelocks, fire, and then charge with bayonets. And that worked for much of the war because Americans don't have bayonets on our muskets usually and can't withstand a full British charge. So that's the basic strategy. You can only shoot 50 yards. The cannons only shoot about half a mile. So you will see where the enemy is often, and you can't fight them. So the battle is fought in a series of about 6 or 7 engagements, and I'll be talking about those during the course of the talk today. The American troops before the battle were in Englishtown, a couple miles to the east, and on Gravel Hill, a couple miles beyond that. The British had marched across New Jersey. By the way, the campaign got started on June 14th. The British had captured Philadelphia. By European standards, the war should have been over. If you capture the enemy's capital in Europe, the war will be over. The American Congress is too dumb to realize this. When we lost Philadelphia, Congress packs up and moves. And if you've heard my talks before, where'd they move to? York, Pennsylvania. Yeah. And straight Princeton was the capital of the country for a while later in the war when the army was camped at Morristown. And we spent the winter at Valley Forge. The British will be happily ensconced in Philadelphia. Why did they leave? Because the French had made a formal alliance, even though they had been helping us with troops and generals and money before that. After Saratoga, when we showed that we could actually win a battle or two, the French got a fleet together. The British knew what was coming, so they decided to pack up and leave Philadelphia before they got trapped with the French fleet coming up the Delaware River. So they'll cross over to Camden, essentially come up the New Jersey Turnpike, although it's not there then, and be heading up towards New York. And then they decided they were better off going to Sandy Hook and Staten Island, which is what they did. Washington did not follow them. The British are going up through the center of New Jersey. They hated New Jersey. Okay, why? Well, it's not all British. It's said to be 1/3 colonial, 1/3 British, 1/3 neutral. Basically, it's 1/3 wherever the army is that's sitting there at the time, and maybe 2/3 neutral. But there's a lot of colonial period there, so they don't like that. But they don't like the sandy roads, because the turnpike ain't there yet. And they really hate the New Jersey bird. New Jersey state bird in those days was the mosquito. And they hated the weather because it rained every 3 days. So they're going to be heading up the center of New Jersey. Washington went up to Corriales Ferry. Will come across through Hopewell and Cranberry and Monroe to try and intercept them. Some of Washington's staff said they should just let the British go. General Charles Lee, his second command, says, if the British want to go over to New York, let us give them a path of gold to go there, i.e. pay them to go there. But instead, Washington was going to try and catch a portion of their army, which is what happened here. The British army encamped in Monmouth Courthouse, now called Freehold, in 3 different parts. One down by the hospital, one in town where Copenhagen, the British headquarters is, which is still there. By the way, there are still six buildings in the area that were here at the time of the battle. The 2 churches, the one in town, Englishtown, or it said the English church in town, Tennant Church, which is really neat to go visit. You can still, sometimes you can even get inside, but there's a colonial graveyard right there. And then 3 houses, the Sutphen House on the north side of the battlefield, the Craig House off of Route 9 and Shippenoff Road, which we interpret. It's open every Sunday, 1 to 4, colonial farmhouse from the 1750s. And there's another house there over on Monmouth Road. So 6 buildings were in Covenhoven, so there are still 6 buildings around from the battle, and some of them can still be visited. So the British were camped here for a couple days waiting for the Americans to attack them. Reason being is Americans are lousy attackers. Whenever we attack, like at Germantown, we tend not to do well. We are decent defenders. The British found that out at Bunker Hill, which, as you all know, if you've been watching History Channel, was really fought on Breed's Hill, and they put the monument on the wrong hill, but we won't tell that story. We held off until we ran out of ammunition, essentially. And the British lost so many casualties, they did not want to attack us head on for the rest of the war. Because Americans are good defenders, bad attackers. And thinking about it, and some of you have heard this before, Washington's record as a commander-in-chief is 4 wins, 8 losses, and 1 tie. The wins are the sieges at Boston and at Yorktown. 2 of the other wins will be at the sneak attacks at Trenton and Princeton. And then there's 8 losses, and the 1 tie is this one in Monmouth. Now, I say if he had been manager at the New York Giants, he would have been fired before the season was over. But the Americans really didn't have anybody to replace him with anyway. So we're lucky he did not get shot earlier in the war, which almost happened at Princeton when we rode in front of the American line to organize the troops. And the British had a clear shot at him, and the British commander says, no, it's not gentlemanly. Okay, to shoot at the enemy officers, because sometimes the officers on both sides felt more akin to each other than they did with their own private troops. Although at the Battle of Saratoga, we had a sharpshooter named Timothy Murphy who managed to shoot the British commander Fraser, and that's one reason we won the battle, because we cheated. But whatever happens, happens. The British are waiting here for us to attack, and Washington was waiting for them to leave. So on the morning of June 28, 1778, the British Army is in 2 divisions. The 2nd Division, the Hessians, left town around 4 in the morning, heading up towards Colt's Neck. They had with them a wagon train 10 to 12 miles long, full of supplies and stuff they stole along the way. And then the good division of British troops under General Cornwallis was just leaving town at 7 in the morning. They left behind a rear guard of 1,500 men in the town and a covering force of around 500 men at the hedgerow here in the center of the battlefield. On the morning of the battle, General Charles Lee, who has commanded the American advanced troops, advances on the hedgerow. There's back and forth fighting. We even had our militia on the field for a couple hours, back and forth, till finally we triumphed, and that covering force withdrew back into town, and Lee, who was, again, Washington's second command, leads his force of several thousand men into Monmouth Courthouse to try and beat up that British rear guard of 1,500 men. Now, you would think that Lee, with around 4,000 men, could have defeated them enemy easily, but instead he made a complicated plan. The reason I'm telling the battle history is because the generals I'll be talking about had different roles in this. He sends General Wayne around the British left. He goes too far. He sends Lafayette to the British right. Lafayette was only 21 years old, advanced too quickly, ends up with only 1 regiment attacking, says this ain't going to work, he pulls back. He sends General Dan Morgan, we'll be talking about, as the American rifleman. Now, most of the troops I mentioned had muskets. They shoot 50 yards. We do have Daniel Moon and Davy Crockett rifle muskets that will have a groove in the barrel, put a spin on the bullet, shoots a lot farther. We got the bright idea, let's put all the riflemen into 1 unit, which they did, put it under General Dan Morgan, and he was down by the Burger King on Route 9, and Lee sending mortars the day of the battle in the morning, attacked the British rear. So his plan, Lee, was to go left, go right, big force in the middle, force in the back, we'll capture the British rear guard at 1,500. Okay. Didn't work. I said Wayne went too far, Lafayette went too fast with too little, and when Morgan got his message to attack the British troops in the morning, he thought that Lee meant tomorrow morning, the 29th, because Lee didn't put a timestamp on it. So he sat there all that. And that'll come up in a couple spots in the talk I'm going to do. So Lee eventually has to retreat back. They'll be fighting again in the hedgerow area, and then in the afternoon, the fighting's up on Perrine Hill in the background. So long story short, the battle is fought in different stages, and these generals are the will be taking part in different ways for that. So, the battle included, by the way, and I'll mention these as I go through, 2 future presidents of the United States, Washington and James Monroe, 1 future vice president, Aaron Burr, 2 cabinet secretaries. Okay, Knox will be the first Secretary of War, and Hamilton will be the first Secretary of the Treasury. The future head of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, was here, plus a number of future senators and representatives, including Dan Morgan. So a lot of the generals who reported in the war will also be part of the politics afterwards. Okay, now let's look first at James Monroe. Okay, Monroe is number 1 on the map, and you'll see him up in the upper left corner. When I first started studying the battle, I didn't even know he was here. But what happens is Monroe is a low-level staff officer. He's age 20 at the time of Monmouth. These guys seem young, but they did not, most of them, if they went to college, they went early. I think Hamilton got to college at age 12 or 13. He went to Columbia. Pardon if you have kids that age, I had one through. College is basically 4 years of delaying getting the kids on the job market. Basically, they're not learning a lot of skills in those 4 years that are going to get them a job. It's when they go to grad school or get a master's that they start specializing. So in those days, they all didn't go to college and got a law degree. Somebody's getting it earlier. Monroe started the war as a 2nd lieutenant in the 3rd Virginia Regiment. He had fought in New York, White Plains, and Trenton, where he was one of the few troops that was badly wounded, Monroe, at the Battle of Trenton, when he was leading a charge against Hessian cannons. Reportedly, he could have bled to death had he not gotten direct medical attention. Geez, then we would have had no Monroe Doctrine. Might have been the Madison Doctrine or something. But anyway, good thing he didn't die. He's promoted to captain and is serving as a staff officer to General William Alexander, who we probably haven't heard of. He's also known as Lord Sterling. We probably haven't heard of it either, because we banned, often we rank like British had with royalty in that in the Constitution. And he fought as a staff officer at Brandywine and Germantown, and he is an experienced aide-de-camp. What we do know is his men were not engaged in the first part of the battle. Sterling will be in command of the troops on Perrine Ridge, which if we had the map, the thingy up, you could see over in the back. And it's located, well, where number 1, just where number 5 is there. And in the afternoon part of the battle, he is sent forward to scout the enemy by General Alexander. And we have, there is preserved a neat note that he wrote back to General Washington, observing the enemy inclining toward, or Washington said, excuse me, observe the enemy inclining to your right. I thought it advisable to hang close to them. We'll find out what's there. And Monroe sends a note dated 4 o'clock on the battlefield, identifying what the British were doing. And it was useful because Washington then mounted a counterattack. So very small role in the battle, but James Monroe, future president, is here as a captain at a young age and played a small part in the battle. Okay, now, so I went to the 2 presidents, Senator Monroe and Washington. The vice president is Aaron Burr, and I mentioned that he is item number 2 on the map. That's where his horse got shot and fell on him and actually knocked him out of the war. Okay, cabinet members. Henry Knox. Now, you have heard of Knox because we have Knoxville, Tennessee, and we have Fort Knox, where we keep all our gold, except all the gold that's under New York City. You know, I watch the History Channel. There's a lot of gold buried somewhere under New York City. He will be the first Secretary of War, is what they called it then. It became the Secretary of Defense. What do they call it now?
Secretary of War.
It's still war?
Now war. They changed it from
Secretary of Not War? Oh, okay. Anyway, he is the commander of the American Artillery at Monmouth. He's one of the more interesting figures in the Revolution. If you get a chance to look him up on Wikipedia, take a crack at it. He's a little overweight guy. He's a bookseller. He wears glasses. Beginning of the war, he runs a bookshop in Boston. And he said, the war's starting, I want to help. So he read some books on cannons. And then when the British were there at Boston, after they defeated us at Bunker Hill/Breeze Hill, and wouldn't go away because they were mad at Boston and closed down the port and all that. And I forgot to mention in the events that we're sponsoring, on July 4th, here at the park, we will have a commemoration with an artillery battery here, showing how to shoot a cannon and showing what life in a cannon is like. And at 1 o'clock on July 4th, yours truly will do a public reading of the Declaration of Independence. And I've been practicing reading that, and there's a lot of whereases. When, of course, you're compelled to cite the instances about quartering acts and all kinds of bad things. But mainly it's closing down the port of Boston. Okay. Are we, the Americans, revolting because the British have a tax on cigarettes and legal papers? Okay, who doesn't like the tax on legal papers? The lawyers, because they have to charge the people more. Okay, so and who doesn't like the closing of the port of Boston? The merchants. Okay, and who doesn't like, or who likes the whole war with England? The rich Virginia planters, because they owed the British banks tons of money. And those are the three main groups that are getting the war going, from my viewpoint. Okay, the lawyers, the merchants, and the Virginia planters. Yes, we can stir up the people with laws about representation and that, but when you really look at it, and sorry if I'm preaching from the pulpit, England did not have representational democracy. You don't have to live in the district you represent. I live here in New Jersey, but my home state of Michigan wants to elect me to represent, so they can. If they elect me, they elect me. You don't have to live where you represent. They have a strange kind of representative government, so they argued that America was represented through the British system. We said no, and that's part of the deal there. But anyway, there's a lot of whereases. And Knox then reads this artillery book, and the British are in Boston, and they won't leave. And Knox gets the idea, he presents to General Washington, we have just captured Fort Ticonderoga. Now, if you get a chance to travel and visit places, there's two places I encourage you to see. Not Saratoga, I'm sorry, it's a famous battle. It's on two different sites, it's big, and I got confused trying to drive around Saratoga. Fort Niagara. If you're at Niagara Falls with the kids and the family, fine. You go about 15 miles north, there's an old French fort that's really cool. It's not very often visited there at the entrance to the, I guess it's actually the Niagara River. But the really neat one is Fort Ticonderoga, up near Albany. And this is French and Indian War. There's lots of stories of the fort being captured back and forth. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys had just captured it. Well, that's cool. So the British won't be there at Fort Ticonderoga. The cool thing is it had 59 cannons there. We needed cannons to chase the British out of Boston. Good. So we just put them on a train and send them to Boston, right? Except there ain't no trains yet. So Knox shows up there. It's 300 miles from Fort Ty to Boston. It's winter. But he comes there with a plan. And they built sleds and hired a bunch of oxes and ox drivers. And where they could, they dragged the cannons on the sleds up the frozen rivers. And they got them to Boston and set them up and started shooting at the British, and they left the next week. I mean, created that. Okay, he is a hero, so he gets to be commander of the artillery. Now, interesting story. I love doing history. Okay, I love doing history because it's stories, and I know I taught Latin for a living. I'm really a history teacher. Okay, I lost the track of where I was going to go with this, but anyway, so Knox is there to line up those cannons, and the British pack off. And that's what I'm going to. How did he get to be the artillery commander? The French sent officers over early in the war. We were very impressed with people in fancy uniforms, and we hired these French officers right and left. Some of them were worth something, like von Steuben, I'll be talking about. By the time Lafayette got here, we didn't need any more French officers. But he volunteers to serve without pay and even equipped a unit, and they'd say, okay, you can stay. Okay. They had a French officer lined up when the army was at Valley Forge to take over the artillery, because he had been formally trained. Knox just read books. So this French officer, and I forget the name now, it's a senior moment, I'll remember on the way home when I don't have to know it anymore. The French officer who was lined up to take over the American artillery wanted to go across the Schuylkill River. So he rode his horse onto the barge, which was dumb. The horse fell off the barge and he drowned. Sorry, Knox gets to stay in command. We'll be here to help win the Battle of Monmouth. We'll be here to be head of the American armies for a while after the war. That was fortunate. I mean, as fortunate as, I'm sorry I'm telling stories, but I love Civil War history too. U.S. Grant was known for being a drunkard out in the West, even though he really went to high rank. He had been demoted after, even though he won the Battle of Shiloh, he got surprised there. His boss, General Smith, was getting on a boat in the Mississippi, slipped on the gangplank, skinned his knee on the iron gangplank. Click gangrene, died. Because of that one accident, Grant got promoted to the head of the armies, took Vicksburg, took Chattanooga, won the war, and became president. Because one general you never heard of slipped on a gangplank, skinned his knee, and died. War is a strange story. So, Knox will be in overall command of the American artillery. The best way to study this battle is study where the cannons are. Because they will be used, they're very strong for attack, to attack the enemy cannons and organized infantry. But they're even better at defense. Most of the casualties in this battle will not be caused by muskets and not caused by capture. They're caused by troops in front of cannons. And it's not that they're shooting cannonballs. They will be mostly shooting round, solid cannonballs that look like bowling balls. And they're gauged by size, anywhere from 3 up to 24 pounds. We have examples of them in the gift shop. And they're good for knocking over other cannons or shooting at horses. But when you're shooting at troops, you're going to be shooting grape shot. Grape shot is marbles. Canister is smaller, like canister is at the other end. It's like cannonballs, and you shoot that as like a shotgun. But intermediate is the grape shot, and you get maybe 10 or 12 of these in a charge. Those are what really causes the casualties, and we can show caused most of the casualties in this battle. And I've actually planned out, we know there were around 120 fighting casualties on each side. We know the names of maybe 2/3 of the American casualties, but I know what units they were in. And I can map out where these units were. Just as, again, when you study Gettysburg, we know how many soldiers were killed in the 20th Maine Regiment, famous regiment. We know where the 20th Regiment fought. I can label you within probably 20 yards where every soldier got shot, based on burial records and where the unit was at different times. So canister, I say grape shots is what caused problems. Knox will help organize the artillery, especially for the defense. Out here behind the hedgerow is what we call Oswald's Knoll, named after Colonel Oswald of the artillery. But Knox actually set up 6 cannons there, which helped hold that line. And then he also helped line up the cannons up on Pine Hill at the back of the battlefield. So he will be around the battle, and let's see, number 4. Number 4 at the exact middle of the map is where Knox is around 1. And then later in the day, he's going to be farther in the back, near just behind number 5. I guess I didn't mark that in there. So Knox is an important figure. It will help organize the cannons. As opposed, sometimes important figures either aren't on the immediate battlefield, such as Morgan or General Greene, who fought here on this field but didn't do a lot, or they hang around in the back and don't do things. Wayne's in the middle of everything. Lafayette's in the middle of everything. Knox will be all over the place, doing what he's supposed to be doing as chief of the artillery. Knox stayed in the Army. I mentioned that he became head of all the American armies following Washington, when Washington retired. He'll be a, okay, well, he's a big general then, but he had a sad ending. He moved to Maine. And in 1806, he choked to death when eating a chicken bone, eating chicken. So just beware next time you go to Kentucky Fried. Think of General Knox. I mean, he's not a young guy at the time. He's, 56. Died from eating chicken bone, and they didn't have EMTs around at the time. So that's his sad ending. Okay, the other cabinet member was Hamilton, First Secretary of the Treasury. I don't have room to talk about him much here today. I've been that in a lecture. But he came up with the Assumption Bill, which, because some states like Virginia had paid their war debts and others hasn't, he agreed, he worked something through where the Congress would pay everybody's war debts, and the South, who hadn't paid their war debts, said, okay, we need the capital of the country to be in the South. That's why it's at Washington, D.C., and because George Washington owned some swampland there. He didn't know what to do with, so he made out twice. He sold the land to the government, and he got the place named after himself. So anyway, Hamilton, and he set up the Treasury and the Bank of the United States, and a lot of good things that keep us going today. The next most important here is John Marshall. Maybe not a name you're familiar with. If you study American history, which I've taught from time to time, he's from Virginia. He's age 23. Okay, Washington's old here at the battle. When was Washington born? Okay, he's February, because we have President's Day now. I don't know what, who was born when. 1732 by the old system. So he's in his mid-30s. 40s? No, he's 46. Okay, 46. Which is old for them. I mean, he died in 1799 when he caught hold of writing on his estate. At least he's in his 60s, all right. I don't even know when. If Lincoln was my age, he'd be dead. He's been dead for 20 years already. People reached their peak early then. That doesn't mean they didn't live. Some lived to be old, but they would be more foible to problems like chicken bones and pneumonia than people would be. Anyway, so he's only 23 at the time of the battle. He is a captain in the 11th Virginia. He was on this battlefield probably right where we are right now. During the course of the battle, which is going back and forth east to west, one of the local militia officers who lived here went up to General Washington and said, "Sir, there's a big hill where we are that you really ought to get control of before the British do." Now, I mentioned before that the British did not like to attack our troops straight up because we're good defenders. So they developed this tactic, and this worked first at Long Island. Americans here, we're here, shoot your cannons at them, and while the Americans are looking at your cannons, send some troops around behind them. Brandywine. Line your troops up, creek in the middle, line our troops here, shoot cannons at them, send some troops around them, chase them off the field. Works. So what they're going to do here at Monmouth, Americans are over that way, British line up in the middle, and they sent troops down to the south, to this area, to try and get around Washington's army and chase them off the field. Except we had a home field advantage. And the local militia officer warned Washington that this was a strong position here. He sent Woodford's Virginia Brigade, around 800 men, to this spot along with 46 cannons. When you look down this hill, this is a damn strong position because there's a stream with a morass and mud down at the bottom, open field of fire for about as far as muskets can shoot, cannons up there that can see all the way till the next ridge a quarter mile away. We got here before the British did, around 1 in the afternoon we got here. The British may have formed down there, they did not attack this position. They were too smart for that. So what's General Clinton going to do? Keep your cannons lined up, shoot at the American cannons. This is when Molly Pitcher's involved. And we can't get around the American south wing. Let's go around their north wing. So he gets the Black Watch together and Battalion of Light Infantry, and they're going to go around, try to get around Washington's left up on Craig Road. Washington anticipated this and sent Lafayette with some troops over to near Tennant Church, between Tennant Church and Manalapan Englishtown High School, if you know the terrain up there, to block them. I think they got more blocked because there's some really bad streams up there that you can't get across. The British couldn't get around our left flank either. Okay, so they're going to withdraw and eventually leave the field because Washington was able to anticipate what he was doing. Now, okay, so what I got telling that set of stories because Marshall was here as a captain, a mid-range officer in the Virginia unit that was on this hill, maybe even where we are right now. That's cool. I did, at one point I was talking to the head of the park about maybe putting up little markers on where famous people were. And he thought, well, maybe not a bad idea, but we would have trouble mowing the grass around them. So I'm not quite sure what to do. What we have been working on and haven't gotten there yet is put new markers up, which we did on the end of the hill. Then we have these little QR code thingies, and you can click it on your phone, and they'll tell you who was doing what to who where. Take this map with you, maybe that'll help you. Okay, now, other important officers. Talked about Lafayette, von Steuben. Now, there's a lot of stories about von Steuben, mostly true, but we need to watch what's going on as you do with oral history. I've written books on Molly Pitcher, which I believe is based on a real person, but the stories all got distorted. The one that drives me nuts this time of year, and if you watch the History Channel, you'll catch up on it, is the 13-star flag that Betsy Ross made. Okay, when George Washington crossed the Delaware, what flag does he have? 13 stars in a circle. No. Washington's headquarters flag might have been all blue with 13 stars in a circle. And what's neat with the circle is 1 star for each state. There should have been 14, but we tried twice to take Canada, and they didn't want to play our game, so they can go be their own country. When you have 13 stars in a circle, no one has priority. And you have also the 13 stripes, eventually 1 for each state. That one, yeah, you do Delaware's first. Which one is New Jersey? I ask this to my students. What number of state is Jersey? Right, third. Okay, we're third. But Delaware's license plates that you see in this says the first state. We're like the Gardenia state or something like that, yeah. That's a joke. Betsy Ross made 13-star flags. They were flown by boats late in the war. I'm cultural curator at the New Jersey State Museum on Civil War flags. I also dabble with Revolution flags. The major flag that troops are carrying here is called the Grand Union flag. We have versions of it for sale in the gift shop. It does have the 13 red and white stripes. In the corner is the British Union Jack. And this is the flag that was approved by Congress in 1776 before we had our independence from England. So at the moment that the Declaration of Independence was passed and signed, our national flag was the Union Jack. 13 red and white stripes and a British Union in the center. Eventually they'll get rid of the British line, but the troops here at Monmouth, most of them are still carrying their 1775 flags. I've done some research on that. There is a new design coming in right after Pet Summer that I have an idea of what's on it, but I don't have the exact order yet of what units had what flags, and by the end of the war, we'll have a different system. I've done the same thing with Civil War, again, pardon for the analogies. Civil War units that were enlisted in 1865, went through 65, went through 3 cycles, original flags, mid-war flags, late flags. At the time of Gettysburg, even though it's the middle of the war, and they're transitioning to the middle period flags, they're still carrying their 1861 flags. And a lot of units had them on order. They were made, they just weren't delivered because the Army was busy fighting at Gettysburg. And the flags didn't show up till that fall. And it's kind of interesting because I can go through newspaper accounts on when these flags were delivered because they cite the ceremonies in the newspapers. Anyway, I'm telling more stories. So, von Steuben. Okay, we have Molly Pitcher stories. We have Betsy Ross stories. Von Steuben. Now, we all know how von Steuben retrained the American Army at Valley Forge and we won the Battle of Monmouth. And if you're watching the History Channel, said, no, that's full of errors. Okay. Firstly, we didn't win this battle. It was a draw. The British left. We were on the field. How did it come to be thought of as a win? Because Alexander Hamilton and his friends on Washington staff wrote up the reports to the newspapers like we won. And dang it, we're on the battlefield. They aren't. They ran away like the weasels they are. And we won the battle. So it's more of what historians say is the perception of what happened rather than really what happened. You look at it, we did not win. But American people thought we did, and it gave us enough energy to go on and win the war. Von Steuben retrained the army? No, he did do training. Now, he got enlisted because he claimed to be a major general from the Prussian army. Research shows he wasn't any more than a captain on somebody's staff. He misrepresented himself to, of all people, Ben Franklin, who was the culprit over in Paris that's lining up all these zillions of German and French officers who wanted to come over here and win glory, including Lafayette. Lafayette was on orders from the King of France not to come here. He bought a boat, sailed off, left his pregnant wife behind to go win glory, which he did. Remember, he didn't get killed like Kosciuszko, or Pulaski, excuse me. Anyway, von Steuben, he did train troops, but the troops he's training are the ones at Valley Forge. And the troops at Valley Forge are the veterans. And what he's going to be doing, and this is where he did get the right credit, is these guys knew how to fight and how to line up, but New Jersey troops might have a different set of orders and commands than the Pennsylvania troops. And they would answer okay to New Jersey officers, but they might get confused if they got put under a Pennsylvania officer because their commands might be a bit different. What von Steuben did was to standardize the commands to veteran troops. And then you've heard the story that he trained a bunch of captains, and the captains trained their sergeants, and then the sergeants trained the troops to all fight under the same commands. That will help here at Monmouth, because they have to hear what's called picked men, where if when they decided to go chase the British later in the battle around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, every company would send their 5 best men out to this unit of picked men. Now, these 5 men didn't know their officers. They didn't know most of the guys they were standing next to. How could they fight? Because they had the same organized drill taught at Valley Forge. So it's not that he trained the troops, I will accept he retrained them to be a more efficient army. And there's neat stories there that von Steuben would give a command, and then, like Lafayette would translate it from German to French, and then Hamilton would trade it from French to English. But when he started swearing, everybody knew they weren't doing something right. So von Steuben is a hero of this battle, so much so that the only statue of a soldier from the battle is his. Von Steuben Society put it up there over next to the old building. So his role in the battle starts even before the battle takes place. During the battle itself, he's supposed to be in command of one of the 6 American divisions. He had been ill, so actually the command of it went to Lafayette. But he will be on the field as a supernumerary, big fancy word, an extra staff officer. On the morning of the battle, Washington wants to know what's going on. General Lee, who I mentioned, had gone into the battle, won the early morning part, and got whopped at the noon part. And Steuben will ride forward to what we call Overlook Hill. If you know the Freehold area, Route 9 North, there's a Kia dealership, and then there's a hill, and it's all tree infested now, but you could see into town from up there to see what was going on, to report back to Washington. He was up on the hill, the British cavalry was running around, and saw an officer up on the hill that was clearly not British, with a fancy uniform and medals flashing. Why in heaven's name is he riding around the field with his medals on? He caught the sunlight because he's facing east. And the British side, they thought it was Lafayette. They thought they'd go catch him. So they come and chase him. And he rides away. Unfortunately, he rode down the battlefield, towards the battlefield near Route 522. The British were on the parallel road. Never did quite catch him. When he got to the hedgerow, the story is his horse jumped over the hedgerow and his hat flew off. Stupid story, but what's cool is we have accounts from both American and British troops who saw this officer jumping over the hedgerow using his hat. And what's neat to us historians that will pinpoint or let us correlate what troops are doing what when by that simple story of von Steuben jumping over the hedgerow and losing his hat. So, he will report back to Washington, and he disappears from the battle for a little bit. And I think, do I have a 9 on the map? Okay, 9 on the map lower right is where Overkill is, where he was in the morning when he saw the British. He will lose his hat roundabout number 4 or 10, and going to end up behind the lines. Now, 11 on the far left corner of the map is where he went for the afternoon. He went back to rest. He's an old guy. He gets an order from Washington. General Washington says, "Sir, General Lee's command is tired and worn out," and General Lee is tired and worn out. Lee was actually then in the afternoon hanging out at one of the fancy houses in Englishtown, trying to catch his breath. Washington says, "Steuben, go get Lee's troops and bring them back to the battlefield." So Steuben rides into Englishtown. Lee's up in his room, in his house, yells at him from the front, "What's going on?" And he thought, "Oh, good, Washington's bringing me back to the battle," he says. Steuben says, the general, his Majesty, has ordered me to take command of your troops and take them to the field. And Lee says, "Say what?" And Steuben says, "You want to see the command?" And Lee understood the handwriting on the wall, said, "No." And von Steuben then, from position 11, leads what's rested now of Lee's force back onto the battlefield. By then, the fighting was dying down. They fought from dawn to dusk. It's now 6 o'clock or so. The British had withdrawn back to what's called Division Brook near Route 9. We didn't know. We thought the battle would continue the next day, and Steuben took Lee's troops and formed them in the field over the next ridge, ready to renew the battle in the morning. But what the British did was to line up, light some campfires, leave a few troops there to shoot, to keep the fires going, and cowards that they are, they marched away because they didn't want to play no more. Washington did that several times during the war, by the way. The most famous one was the evacuation of Long Island. He was there in command of field troops, ready to renew the battle the next day, and the British were gone. So he has a good role in the battle, even though he's just working as a staff officer, doing what Washington asked him to do, scout the enemy and lead troops on the field. He later went down south. He commanded a division at Yorktown, left the army in 1784, lived in New York City, had a high lifestyle, and basically died broke in 1794. It's an interesting story. You're going to go and look up somebody on the internet on von Steuben. Now, the point of the talk there was that his role in the battle is overstated. Now, just as I will not criticize Betsy Ross for making flags, she just didn't make the flags that the troops carried at this battle. She made flags that were carried by ships. Steuben retrained the troops, not trained them, and there's a big difference in that. And think about that when you're watching History Channel, because not a lot of you can pick up on that. And I have written a paper on where you can actually show in the course of the battle where his retraining worked best. That's when they had these picked men around. There were also picked men in the morning with Lee. That you could take random men from different regiments in the American Army, put them together under officers they don't know, and have commands they could learn and understand and work as a unit. That is thanks to what von Steuben did. He retrained veteran troops. So if you come away with any thought from this talk, that's the one I'd like you to come away with. Okay, now the last one is General Morgan. He's on just below the map, number 15 on the right side. He's down by the Burger King on Route 9. He's from Virginia. He's a noted rifleman, and I kind of jumped my gun and told the story earlier that he's down there on Route 9 with the idea of attacking the British rear. And Lee, as I mentioned, the morning of the battle, Lee was up most of the night, around 4 or 5 in the morning. He'd been up a while. Sends the order to General Morgan, in the morning, attack the British rear. So Morgan looks at the order, he looks at his staff, and it says, in the morning, I've been up all night too. I guess that means tomorrow, the 29th. So he sat there. Now, as he's sitting there, by 10 o'clock, there's noise of battle going on up in Monmouth Courthouse. And Morgan says, what the hell is going on? Something's going on up there. So he sends a staff officer up there to see what's going on. The staff officer runs into, of all people, General Wayne. Wayne, as I mentioned earlier, had worked on the left wing attack and been pulled back. And Lee was kind of confused about what he should do at that point. And Wayne had conferred with General Scott, who was one of the bad guys on the American side, officers, on what to do, including, as it may say, General Maxwell. Scott's Willie Maxwell is the general in charge of the New Jersey Regulars Brigade. They were in the morning attack, they're in the third line, and they're just kind of just sitting there. And Scott's troops were hot, so we pulled them back into the trees. So Wayne couldn't see them, and Scott's Willie thought they retreated, so he pulled his brigade back. And the Jersey Brigade marches off the field. Not a good story. I do give a talk later in the year or other years on the role of New Jersey militia and regular infantry. This is sad that New Jersey troops, our own troops, did not do well here because Scott's Willie did what he wasn't supposed to do. He didn't have direct orders to leave. He just left. So anyway, Wayne is there, and he's involved in this too. He should have known better. So when this officer from Morgan comes up and says, what's going on? Wayne essentially says, things are not going well, fend for yourself. Thank you, General Wayne. So Wayne will withdraw back to the middle of the battlefield, and the officer goes back to Morgan and says, things up there aren't going well. Wayne says, fend for yourself. So Morgan pitches camp and sits there the rest of the day. If he had attacked, we actually might have, I don't think we'd had a chance at winning, but certainly done better. But he doesn't participate because of Lee's bad order, not being an aggressive officer at the moment, and Wayne screwed him up. Now, he gets a chance to redeem himself. When the British march off the battlefield during the night of June 28-29, head up to Colt's Neck, they're going lickety-split to get to Colt's Neck and cross what's called Nut Swamp. If you've ever been up there by Middletown, it's pretty cool because there's heights, they're called the Heights of Middletown. So they marched lickety-split to get up to the Heights of Middletown, lined up, waiting for Washington to attack them. Washington had no intention of attacking them. His troops are tired. He will rest them the day after the battle and then head up towards New Brunswick. He does, however, tell Colonel Morgan, whose troops had not been engaged, so they therefore should be fresh, and some New Jersey militia to go harass the British. So Morgan, on the morning of the 29th, packs up his men, picks up a few militia, heads out Dutch Lane, through Colt's Neck, up towards Nut Swamp, starts running into British advanced troops, and says, damn, it's hot and there's too many mosquitoes. And didn't do any more. Monmouth was not General Morgan's high point in the war. Actually, he did capture 30 prisoners and around 100 deserters in that abbreviated part of the campaign. And he will go to fight in the South later in the war. But as happens with some of the officers, including Scott's Willie Maxwell, later in the war, he's still a brigadier general and he's not being promoted. Everybody else is. What did he do? He resigned from the Army. Now, he will end up in the New Jersey legislature and will become respected for doing that later in the war, but he leaves. What happens with Morgan? 1781, he didn't like the way the war was going in the South. He resigned. Generals can do that. Privates can't. Becomes a landowner. Died in 1802. He was in the legislature, so he did do something of value. So I guess we'll call him a lesser light. I don't know if you've run across his name before in your study of the war, but it's certainly an interesting story. There are a lot of general officers here. I've covered maybe half or 2/3 of them, are the ones you might have heard of. But again, as some, and being a teacher, I want you to go home with the idea that the major thought was Steuben retrained the Army, not trained it. But at this battle, we have 2 presidents, future presidents, 1 vice president, 2 cabinet members and the first head of the Supreme Court were here, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's my talk. I'll be glad to entertain questions or talk with you individually afterwards.